which I think you would probably all agree was but this is what I would call a standard slang word, because it's a word that everybody knows. It's not a word just used by college students, although sometimes they will put it on their list. Apparently this word dates from before the time of Shakespeare, and it's been considered slang the whole time it's been in the language. Nobody has ever thought this is a standard word. So the meaning of slang expressions can indeed change very rapidly or can vary considerably. So I've got a bunch of examples there. I'm not going to try to go through all of them, but so, you know, we have things like in 1989, dank meant bad, which is kind of similar to its standard meaning. But this year, somebody defined it as cool in a strange or weird way. And speaking of surfing, you've probably all heard the word gnarly, which has varied back and forth between different definitions by different people in the whole course of its history. Nobody volunteered it this year. So the last time I heard it was in 2009, which is the last time I did this before this year, recently. And you can look at the rest of those definitions. So a very common type of change is for a word that names some kind of negative concept in standard language to acquire a positive connotation in slang. So in addition to sick and dank, which are both negative words in standard English, current examples include bad, disgusting, drippy, sickening, and tough, which are all positive words in current slang. And for some reason, there's no example that I found yet of the opposite development of a word that means something good that acquires a negative connotation in slang. I don't know why that would be.
But roses used to stink. So, I mean, the word stink used to have a potentially positive connotation, and it's gone downhill.
Okay, I don't think that's slang.
No, but I'm saying words can evolve in a negative, but it's, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is just something about slang. So there's one example that I think is really amazing. So you probably have all heard this word Karen, which I regard as a really nasty word for poor people named Karen. I'm so glad my name isn't. So Wikipedia defines Karen. This is sort of like the standard meaning of this, I would say, sort of general slang word Karen. A pejorative term for a white woman perceived as entitled or demanding. Depictions may include demanding to speak to the manager or being racist. So I have 4 definitions from students from this year, last month. So 2 of them, the ones that I say 1 and 2, those were 2 definitions that seem very similar to the Wikipedia definition. Then somebody else defined it as deliberate troublemaker who feels entitled. This person did not use a word like woman, but the example they gave included the word she. So perhaps they were still thinking Karen could only refer to a woman. But then look at this number 4 definition. Person who is offended by everything and needs to speak to the manager all the time, making the situation uncomfortable and inconvenient to other people. And I'll read you this student's definition, example sentence. He wants to return a shirt that has been worn for a month and angrily asked to speak to my manager because I refuse to do so. He is such a Karen. So I think that shows, you know, really fast evolution of how this word is used by students who most likely are completely aware of the way, you know, like the Wikipedia definition, but they're using it in a much more evolved sort of sense. So the mini dictionary that I'm going to be talking about, and that most of the data that we'll see from now on comes from, Linguistics 1 this quarter, which just ended at UCLA, had about 500 students, and almost all of them answered my call, which I had arranged with the professor who was teaching it as a class project, to tell me 3 slang expressions. I asked them to give me the slang expression in its simplest form, a definition, and an example sentence. And we'll be talking more about how they did in terms of finding simplest forms and writing definitions. Their examples, of course, were all fine because their examples were fine. So here are the top 10 examples, and I'm not telling you what they all mean, but these are all standard current slang words. And you can see that cap and no cap, which are clearly related terms, were the most frequent. Out of the roughly 500 students, 81 of them included as one of their 3 words a form of cap. So this is really a very important word, and we'll talk about it later. So there's a tie for position 67 between fire and bet. So bet means something like yes. Fire means something really good. And I do have this one photograph in here. You probably know these Liberty Mutual commercials that have the Statue of Liberty in the background. This is one that you may or may not have seen. It's very recent, but I love it. It's these two guys who are both knitters showing off their knitting project. You can see why I like this. And the guy on the left is showing off this pair of shoes that he knit. And the guy on the right says, dude, those are so fire. And I was really pleased to see this because it's showing, here's this word. That's the only picture you're getting. Okay, so here are my 5 favorite new items from this year. And I really like all of these. So when you hear the word drippy, does that sound like a positive term? It means very fashionable. So did you see those Nike she's wearing? She's so drippy. Gucci means good or okay. And frankly, you can see people just thought it sounded like good, I think. How are you? I'm Gucci. Then there's one of my real favorites, which is mood, which means something like I can relate. So this quarter is such a pain. Mood. Sadness Everdeen. I don't know how many of you remember the Hunger Games. The heroine's last name was Everdeen, and I don't really understand this, but I think it's so great. I left my car keys in the apartment, and I have to go back and get them. Oh, Sadness Everdeen. But here's kind of probably my favorite, which is UCLA, University of Zoom, Los Angeles. And maybe that's what these poor kids were suffering for almost 2 years. I mean, just really amazing.
But drippy is a counterexample. That's a word that sounds bad to me in standard English, and it's favorable here. Yeah, so you can have a negative term to pick up.
That's what they do.
Yeah, bad is good, but you don't get good being bad.
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
So let's talk a little bit about making a slang dictionary. So what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about examples that these students in this class submitted and the way they would have been edited by one of my teams of student editors. So remember, I worked with 6 groups of student editors on making slang dictionaries and working really hard to make them be good dictionaries. So here are the 3 principles that basically guided most of our work. So the first one is entry words and phrases should appear in the simplest possible form. This means, for instance, that a verb that can appear in the form cap should be listed as cap rather than capped or capping. So that is something that I asked the students to do, and you'll see that many of them did not submit the simplest form. But sometimes the simplest possible form may be longer than just its most important word. So maybe some expressions are sort of like idioms that need to have a fuller form in their listing. And then finally, the definition should be words or phrases that can be used exactly the same way the word defined can be used. So this is the principle of substitutability. There's some exceptions. So verbs, in dictionaries are often defined with the word to in front of a verb. You don't have to use the word to every time you use the verb in a sentence. And then there's some interjections or exclamations that can't really be defined, but they're just given with an example of how they're used. Yes?
The book you're talking about, how long does this stay current?
I did these projects every 4 years when I was doing them, because that's like one generation of college students. In some senses, it was probably not current on the day it was published. On the other, a lot of the things in it, even the oldest one, are still probably considered student slang. So, it's more on the question of individual words, Jim. I mean, there's really no way to quantify. I mean, slang does change quite rapidly, but a lot of it stays the same. We're going to be looking at these examples, and then I gave a lecture to the class, which is sort of similar to what I'm talking to you about. That was why I knew I could volunteer, Jim, even before I had collected these things, because I knew I was going to be giving this lecture to the class. I wanted to make them feel okay if in this lecture that I was giving to 500 people, I used one of their examples and showed how it could be, improved. that's this thing here in italics. I really wanted them to know that I was grateful for everything. So principle A, that's the one that says you want everything in the simplest possible form. So here's an example. Let's mob, that was what somebody said. This is the simplest form of my slang expression. And the definition is let's leave. And the example that dinner was good, let's mob back to the apartment now. So in this example, the definition, the suggested entry, and the example all match pretty well. They all contain let's. But let's look at another submitted example by a different student. This was a popular word, although it didn't make the top 10. Let's get everyone together and then we'll mob. So this uses the same verb, but there's no let's, which suggests that you want the entry word to be mob, not let's mob. Now let's look a little bit more closely at the definition. This is principle C. Leave, which is, if we say the word is mob and the definition is leave, then we can assume that we could define mob as to leave. You could substitute this into the second example. Let's get everyone together and then we'll leave. But you can't substitute leave in the first example, the one that was submitted by the let's mob submitter. That dinner was good, let's leave back to the apartment now. I don't think anybody here could say that. This is the kind of thing linguists do. So this suggests that maybe a definition including go is better than one with leave. So if we define mob as to go, maybe with a note about saying it has to be as a group, you can use it in both of these examples. So here's just a note saying often people use to in verb definitions. If you have questions about anything, Bill is not the only person who's allowed to ask questions. Yes, Chip.
Well, earlier in the presentation, you mentioned the word Karen is a name that has bad connotation for whatever reason. My firstborn is named Karen.
I feel sorry for her. No, I really mean it. I think this is just a terrible thing that people have done to this name.
How can parents find out what are the bad?
You don't know.
Well,
It wasn't a bad name 50 years ago.
This development happened long. This use of Karen like this is like maybe 5 years old. It's not old. Another one is Alexa. There are plenty of women named Alexa and they hate their name because often if people say their name, some machine says, what can I do for you? And I have a friend named Siri and I used to think it was funny to make jokes about her name, but I don't anymore because, if you have a name like Siri or Alexa, people are always thinking about these machines that do things. But I think the Karen thing is even worse because, it has this really bad connotation. And you could talk to your daughter about that. I'm sure she feels that.
So the answer is parents can't do anything.
Parents can't do anything.
You can't anticipate it.
No.
Well, how
Ma'am,
about
I've got a question.
Okay.
This is Rich. Off.
See you.
To what extent, you might have said this, and the sound isn't all that great, so you may have said this, but to what extent is slang really a way by which people distinguish themselves from others, like kids from their parents, or one university or group on a campus with another group? In other words, it's a boundary making kind of function that separates people. And I can say things that you don't know and you don't know what I'm saying.
Right. I tried to say that at first, but maybe I said it too fast. I absolutely believe that it has, I think I said social and political uses to help people recognize members of their group and to show group solidarity. So just exactly what you said, Rich, really good point.
We just had a conversation with our grandson, who's a sophomore in college yesterday, and he was telling us about some of the, I guess, slang words that have to do with smoking weed and drinking. And one of the words we found out was crossed, C-R-O-S-S-E-D. That means
Yes, this year.
it's here. Okay, never mind. Then I'll just.
I'm not going to talk about it though. So at UCLA, that means affected by smoking weed and drinking together. That's what.
At the same time, and getting high and drunk at the same time. Yeah.
That's pretty.
Thank you.
Are
Yes.
slang words only being utilized by younger people?
Oh, no, we older people use lots of slang words, except they wouldn't even be recognized as slang words by younger people because they're the slang words of when we were in college, which is when your slang gets sort of frozen, I think. So, I mean, for instance, one of my best words for talking about somebody that is behaving in a way that I think is really awful is turkey, which was a word that people used when I was in college, but you know, that is not current. So is it slang? It's only, you know, geriatric slang. But I think we all use lots of slang. It's just, you know, we don't use this up to the minute slang like what I'm talking to you about right now.
Well, there's another generational thing is I say, you know, interject randomly, when I'm thinking, whatever. And my son uses like.
Sure.
And for some reason it drives me crazy because that percussive K, whereas seems sort of neutral. I realize syntactically it's the same thing. It's like I'm getting my thoughts together, but it's weird how that evolves.
But like has been around for a long time.
Oh yeah, but
it's absolutely still used, like 100%. So let's talk about spilling tea, which I really like this. This is a really great metaphor. So I'll tell you something about it when we get to the end. I mean, it's just really fun. So spilling tea, definition: to talk about gossip or drama. Yesterday, my roommate was spilling tea about what happened at the party. So the definition is in the form of a verb definition with a to and everything. And the example includes the form of the entry, but the complete verb phrase in the example, the part that means talked, was spilling tea. So it doesn't really match what they're saying. So if you wanted it to match the verb definition, you'd have to say something like was spilling tea or be spilling tea. And then there were many other submitted examples that included a different form, such as spill the tea, what happened? So probably the best form of the entry is either spill tea or spill the tea. My favorite example that just uses tea is if you have some really, really exciting gossip, you could say the tea is hot. So
tea equals gossip.
Seems like, yeah. Principle B, sometimes the simplest possible form may be longer than just its most important word. So caked up was submitted. And so here's the first time we're getting a definition that isn't, to my mind, a definition at all. It's sort of like a rambling discussion of when you might use the word. This is a slang term that is often used to describe a person who appears they have a large behind. The word cake as a slang term is synonymous with someone's buttocks. And the example, the dude that just walked out of the gym must have hit some squats because sheesh, he's all caked up. So, you know, the definition is really not telling you very much about how to use this word. It's talking about one part of the word, but we're not using the word cake, we're using the word caked up. So maybe caked up means something like having a large behind, but what about that all? If you assume that both the apostrophe S in the he's and the all of the example are part of the expression, then we can list it as be all caked up and define it as to have a large behind, maybe. So when B is included in an entry, you probably can figure this out. In an example you can use is, are, am, were, was, being, so on. Okay, so this is one I really like, slay. So there were 13 people who submitted slay, and we're going to look at 2 submissions. So definition, this is another one of these weird definitions. This is more in response to someone describing something that another person did amazingly or looked really cool doing. It's a compliment to someone's actions or appearance. It's similar to good, like when a person says, you did good, or you look so good. You know, it's just really hard to look at this and think this is a definition because they seem to be saying it means good, but the example is, oh my God, you guys slayed out there tonight. I got this with Alan, and I said, they don't say slew. And Alan says, well, I wouldn't say slew either. I think slew is only used about things like in the Bible or something. So the definition here seems to be defining you guys slayed rather than the basic term slay. So maybe a definition for slay might be to do good or to look good. Then there's another slay. Definition, slay is a verb that means something is amazing or done really well. So, you know, they're trying, but you know, these people have all looked at dictionaries and seen how you write definitions. I mean, you know, it is very, very hard to learn how to write definitions, and I make lots of dictionaries and you have to think really hard, and we'll get to one that's really tricky in a minute. But you just would sort of think that, you know, something is amazing or done really well is just not really the right definition. But anyway, here's the example. You're slaying it right now in that outfit. By the way, I wasn't so nasty when I was talking about this to the students. So this looks like the same word that we just saw. And the definition is similar to the first one, but we can't substitute. We can't say, you're doing it good right now, or you're looking at good right now. So how do we fix this submission? Anybody have an idea? We're getting to the audience participation part. How would we fix this submission? What do we want to do to it?
But do well.
You're
There's the it is the problem.
Yeah, the it is the problem, because, you know, what do we want to do about that yet? Remember what principle B is? Principle B is sometimes the most important word is not what you want to list. It's not the only thing you want to list. So what should be our entry in the dictionary? Yeah, yeah. Bill, I'd love to have you in my class. So if we define this as slay it, so it's a different expression from the first one, which was slay. In both cases, in every case with slay, the students just submitted the word slay because it's sort of like a, you know, sort of exciting word. But this one, and I think one other one, needed to have the submission, the word that we put, the entry word, be slay it. And then you can define it as something like to do good or something like that. But as Bill pointed out, anything you define just slay it, anything that you define just slay as is going to have a problem about that yet. Okay, flop era. A time in a person's life when things are not going their way. It could be due to bad luck, poor circumstances, or bad decision making. I just got rejected from my third internship and spilled coffee on my favorite sweater. I guess I'm just in my flop era. So you can see this time, actually the person has done a good job with the definition, because clearly flop era does refer to a time in somebody's life. But if we substitute this just a definition into the example, I guess I'm just in a time in a person's life when, it doesn't really seem to make sense. So the am in my part of the example sentence seems like an important part of the expression, even though, you know, am, in, and my are not really very salient words. I mean, flop era is a much more zoomy type of word. So maybe the listing should be something like to be in one's flop era. And the definition would be to be at a time in your life or something like that. Okay, so principle C is definitions should be words or phrases that can be used exactly like the word defined. So in the slang classes, we call this a substitution principle. So keep it P. This was very popular, various different things about P. Just the word P, keep it P, keeping it P, all kinds of things. One's demeanor should reflect that of a player or something lacks emotions. I think this person left out a word. And is nonchalant, especially when it comes to liking another person. In essence, the term P really means player. It comes from the song Pushin' P by Gunna. So I don't know if you guys all know what a player is. A player is somebody who, you know, has a lot of relationships and doesn't really act in a sterling way in terms of character. So here's an example, which is a little dialogue. So each of the dashes indicate a different speaker. So one guy says, hey, if you really like her, you should tell her and treat her right. And the other guy says, nah, I gotta keep it P, not trying to catch feelings out here. So I think the definition here is really just sort of a philosophical statement. It's not really defining this word. We can't substitute it into the example. And, you know, this shows why we need examples. So anybody want to try to think of a better definition of keep it P? Well, but I think about it. You want something that's going to fit. So I got a casual.
Oh.
So we want, this is what I mean by the substitution principle. We want something that we can put into the example sentence, I gotta keep it P, that means the same. It's kind of hard to think of what you would say.
Does it have to be said with keep it?
In this expression. So, I mean, a lot of people submit it, keep it P, so it goes together. There are other, so you could also talk about pushing P, or you can talk about just P, but those are all slightly different uses of this word. So the keep is part of the expression. So you see how this is tricky?
But keep it cool.
Neutral?
Well, again, that's just like casual. See, we want something that will fit with keep it P. So I got a neutral. You know, it seems like it should be something like to lack emotions and be nonchalant or something like that. That seems to be what is expressed by this, but you know, it's hard. There were some things that people submitted. Well, for some things that people submitted, I sent them emails saying, you know, can you explain more about how you use this? And then there were other things that I just couldn't figure out what they meant from even like a few email exchanges with people. So there were 500 students in the class. They didn't all participate in this. Maybe there weren't quite 500 students, but I think I got about 490 people attempting to do the assignment. And then I had further email exchanges with, maybe a quarter of them. So it was a lot of emails. You can't imagine how much time it took to edit all this stuff. Here's a good one. The submitted word was rent-free. The slang phrase rent-free is used for when you can't stop thinking about a situation, person, or thing. So my boyfriend lives rent-free in my head. So it's tempting to write the definition as something like to obsessively think about. But in the example, it's the boyfriend, not the one that's doing the thinking, that's the subject of the sentence. So the sentence says, my boyfriend lives rent-free in my head. So you're saying something about the boyfriend, not about you. So the entry is probably better put as to live rent-free in someone's head. And then the definition has to be something like to be hard to get out of one's head. I mean, so clearly this person who submitted the example was thinking about it from her point of view. I can't stop thinking about him. But in order to say that, you say he lives rent-free in my head, which is pretty interesting. Okay, BDE. Definition, one who has a sexy confidence without being cocky. Example, I don't know what she likes about him. He's not even cute. He must have BDE. So BDE was defined by this person helpfully as big dick energy. The definition is defining a person who has this confidence. But when you say he must have BDE, you're not saying he must have a person with sexy confidence. Probably BDE means something like sexy confidence without being cocky. So a word like BDE is usually referred to as an acronym. Acronym is a word formed from the initials of the words that make it up. English actually has two types of words like that. What I call true acronyms like NATO or AIDS, where it's made up of these initials, but we pronounce it as though it was a regular word. And then the other kind people call initialisms or alphabetisms, like UCLA or HIV, where the separate initials are pronounced separately. So we write in our slang books initialisms with periods. So in this handout, you may have noticed that every time I write UCLA, I write U period, C period, L period, A period, which is not what the university likes, and I have had sort of interactions with them about this. So they write UCLA, just as one word, but that's not the way we pronounce it. So presumably BBE is pronounced BBE. So acronyms can change their pronunciation in both directions. My father graduated from UCLA many years ago. And at that time, people pronounced the name UCLA like UCLA. In Spanish today, it's pronounced UCLA. So those are true acronyms, UCLA and UCLA. But it's not pronounced as a true acronym today, it's pronounced as an initialism. So as a more current example, FOB, which means newly arrived immigrant or a person who came from another country that comes from fresh off the boat. I've only heard this pronounced as a true acronym by students I've talked with, relatively recently. But when I first heard this word over 30 years ago from students, it was pronounced FOB. So that was the case where FOB changed into FOB, the opposite direction as where UCLA changed into UCLA. So another type of interesting slang expression is the reverse initialism, where people make up possible sources for an existing acronym, like one of my favorites for UCLA is under construction like always, which if you've ever been to UCLA, you know that this is true. So UCLA students have a lot of these referring to USC. The most famous is probably University of Spoiled Children, but there are lots of others, some of them less polite. Slaps. Definition, something that is really good. Example, I always grab dinner from Chipotle because the food there slaps. So even advanced linguistic majors have trouble coming up with a substitutable definition for a word like slap or suck. I didn't get suck as a submission this time. I think it's the first time that I've ever done a slang project when somebody didn't give suck, which sort of suggests that suck is moving into the mainstream. And you may recall that Pastor BJ used it in the sermon about a month ago. And then he said, oh, I shouldn't say that. But the definition, something that is really good is a noun phrase, but the food there, something that is really good doesn't work. Other suggested definitions by other students, slap is a common suggestion. We're very good and of the highest quality, but the food there very good doesn't work in standard English either. You might be able to say that in some people's speech. So you notice that slaps, the way everybody submitted it, has an S ending, but there is a past form, as in the music last night slapped. I was dancing the entire time. So this means that slap is a verb, not a noun or an adjective, just like suck is a verb. So the best definition must be something like to be very good. So let's go back to mob. We earlier defined this as to go with a group of people, but here's some more example sentences of mob. Guy, let's mob BFIT after dinner, then we can mob your room to watch Euphoria. This person really likes mob. Hey, we should mob Target later. Yo, who's trying to mob the nav after practice? These sentences don't work with go, which is how we defined mob before. They need a different definition. So what would it be? How can you define mob that so it'll substitute into these sentences? Yeah, because it has to have a to in order to make these sentences work in English. And we should go to Target later. Let's go to BFIT after dinner, then we can go to your room to watch Euphoria. UCLA students spend an awful lot of time watching Euphoria. I can tell you how many example sentences talked about watching Euphoria. It's just amazing. So here's some more additional issues that face the student editors that I've worked with. So some of the definitions in the mini dictionary are themselves written in slang. And I feel that definitions like that limit readership because there might be people who even now don't know those words. And certainly it seems likely that in a few years, they might not know those words and the dictionary would become dated. So the student editors usually have tried to rephrase such slang definitions in standard English. So if you study the mini dictionary, And if anybody wants a copy of it, you could look at it back there in the back, but if you email me at munro@ucla.edu, I would be happy to send you the mini dictionary. There are many, many words, it's 31 pages of wonderful words.
Now, I have a question about your dictionaries.
Yes.
Have you ever had any pushback? And the idea is, wait a minute, you are revealing our secrets.
But you know, as Jim brought out, their secrets are those aren't their secrets anymore by the time the thing is out.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
No, I mean, the students that worked on it thought it was really a neat thing, and they were very proud to be associated with it. And when I was doing these, they were always for sale in the bookstore, and parents would buy them to try to understand the way their kids were talking. So the ones that are back there, not the sort of fancy actually published one. One of them was actually published. And I'll tell you the story of how it was published. When we did use the first book, which is called UCLA Slang, all the other ones have a number. It got quite a lot of attention. I was interviewed on tons and tons of radio shows, and some of you may remember Charles Perrault, who used to be on CBS. He interviewed me on his late night radio TV program. And you know, I got an awful lot of press, and it had one little mention in the New York Times. So the New York Times had a student correspondent who would submit things for a very, very small little paragraph in the New York Times. And the day after this appeared in the New York Times, there were 3 publishers who called me up and were bidding against each other for the right to publish this book. So the students and I revised it. We picked one of the publishers. We got an advance. We divided it up. The students came back and they worked again on it, and it was published. And unfortunately, it came out during the first Gulf War, when nobody cared about sort of humorous college stuff. And so it didn't sell really well, but it is still available on Amazon, believe it or not. So that's my funny story. If you want to get published, make sure that your project is mentioned in the New York Times, and probably you will get a contract. It's amazing. I mean, I cannot believe this.
I'm sure that you avoid war.
Yeah, and avoid more. Well, so don't try to get published right now. Not funny. Some of the words in the mini dictionary seem old, or you may feel that they're not even slang. The student editors eliminate many such words. You need to remember that many of the UCLA students are non-native speakers of English, particularly from countries like Korea. And you know, they typically speak English well enough to take UCLA classes and stuff, but their command of slang is not great, and so they often will submit words which nobody would think were slang, just because they're sort of cute expressions that they have learned. And if I was working with a group of student editors, they would probably eliminate those words, but I didn't eliminate anything from the mini dictionary for a reason like that. I only eliminated things because I couldn't understand them. So some of the words in the mini dictionary may strike you as likely to be offensive to some people or in some contexts. I actually didn't get as many potentially offensive words this time as I did sometimes. Maybe they realized this lady's old, we have to be nice to her. Student editors often choose to mark some words as potentially offensive, as we talked about earlier. So I have this little project in mind, which is that most students have never really studied much grammar. They don't really know what parts of speech are. They don't get much of this these days. In a secondary school English class, you know, the teacher would probably rather be teaching literature, and what they say about grammar is artificial and boring. I think it's more fun to figure out grammatical principles by analyzing actual language, like real slang and used by class members. And indeed, all of my slang classes that I've taught result in the students in them really becoming very sensitive to grammar and grammatical principles. They learn how to write good definitions. They can identify something as a noun or a verb or an adjective or whatever. So here are 2 sentences. Jane is so cool, I want to bestify. That means I want to make a bestie, a best friend out of her. Jane is so cool, I want to bestify her. So the first one is an intransitive verb, doesn't have an object. The second one is a transitive verb, it has an object. And, you know, it's much more fun to figure that out from your own slang than, you know, if somebody is just giving you principles out of an old book. And I said we would talk about cap. Slang words, just like standard English words, can be used in many ways. So cap has 4 definitions based on submitted examples, including illustrating 4 different parts of speech. So don't cap, bro, I know you ate my pizza slice. There it's a verb meaning to lie, an intransitive verb. That's a cap. That means that's a lie. Lie is a countable noun. Dog, that's literally so cap. That's an adjective, meaning something like false or untrue. Nick always talks so much cap. That's an uncountable noun, meaning something like bullshit or trash, if you don't like the word bullshit, which I would never say myself, when I'm not talking about slang.
How about gibberish?
I don't think it means gibberish. I think it means, you know, stuff that's not true. So I mean, it's not that you can't understand it, it's that he's lying. So my question here is, isn't it more fun to analyze slang than just talk about grammar? And that is all I have to talk about, but I can tell you about, this is my dream, is to be able to teach a class of junior high or high school students about this. And I got to put my dream sort of into practice a few years ago. A friend of mine who I was teaching in the English department at Cal State Northridge had a student who was teaching summer school at Culver City High School. And she was teaching English, where for 3 weeks, to make up a semester of English, students had 6 hours of English class a day. Can you imagine how much they loved this experience? And she agreed, because, you know, there's 9th grade English, she agreed that for 9th grade English, you know, she was making up her own lesson plans and everything. They had to read a book for that semester, and she had to give them time to read in class, because these were students who had failed English, and many of them really were not very good readers. I mean, it was going there 2 times a week to talk to them about slang and make a dictionary out of their slang words and talk with them about it, gave me an appreciation for high school teachers that I really didn't have before. This woman was just a saint. I could not believe what she was doing. Can you imagine? 6 hours, they got 1 20-minute break in this 6 hours. That was their lunch break. It was just unreal. And we did make a little mini dictionary out of their words, but it was probably not the best class to test my theory, because I would have preferred to have people who had not failed English, but you know, it was interesting. So anyway, those are my references, all of which I referred to, I think. Anybody have any questions? Yes, Arena.
Have you heard of a game called Poetry for Neanderthals?
No.
I think I tried playing that one day with my nephew, who's in his early 20s. And it's basically it's a game where you're given a phrase and you want people to guess what it is, and you give them clues, but you can only use single syllable words, which is surprisingly difficult. And so you come out sounding kind of like a Kate, you know, need one, you know, this. And it kind of reminded me of this, because it's just like very simple words, but it's a fun game that
Is this just a game that you can find the rules for, or is it?
it's a card game.
It's a card
I
game.
found it on Amazon too. That's what I was looking
Okay.
up. So
So you can say more than one word, but all the words have to be a
it's a
single.
single syllable word.
Okay.
So
Can say a lot.
Just so you know, the term turkey is not lost entirely to geriatrics. There was a fellow probably in his 40s who was written up in the Beach Reporter recently. He used to ride his bicycle up and down the Strand, and he used to yell out at the girls that he saw, that he liked, and make comments about it. And all the kids in the neighborhood, including mine, gave him the name Turkey John.
That's really interesting. I have not heard anybody of kid age use that word. Maybe they mean something a little different by it. I don't know. But it's interesting. Sheila, did you have a question? Oh, I thought I saw your hand. Yeah, Mary.
Does the majority of the slang that goes through, does it change dramatically? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of words that just fall off within 4 years. Is that right? Or do most of them have longer lives?
I think most of them have a slightly longer life. We can go back to, this slide. It's slide 11, Jacob. As I say, I used to do this just about every year. I haven't done it since 2009, and then I did it again this year. That's why in some of these you have a gap. You know, like if you look at dank, people said it meant very good up to 2009, and then they said it again this year. I think if you look at these, you can see that some things are changing radically, but on the other hand, some of the same definition, you know, like sick, the first time that I recorded it meaning something like great, unbelievable, or really good was in 1992. And it has basically the same definition in our thing from this year. So, I mean, you would have to do, I don't have the statistics for you on this. I mean, I have a lot of data, but I haven't tried to see. But many, many words, I mean, we get new words all the time, and then words drop out. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not being used. It means that they're not at the forefront of students thinking about them as slang words. So, I mean, I think that typically they hang around for a fair amount of time. Jim?
Is slang local to a given community? Could a person from UCLA, a student from UCLA, talk to a person from Cambridge or US, United States?
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yes, yes.
A lot of colleges there.
From New York City or whatever. Will they understand each other?
For the most part, I think yes. So I did document a phenomenon, which is true about many things, that there is a west to east progression of slang. So I mentioned this woman, Connie Edley, who studied the slang of students at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And we did notice that a word that was a new word at UCLA would come to be a new word there, maybe the next year or something like that.
An Easterner might think it goes from east to west.
Well, I'm saying it goes from west to east. So,
is an Easterner, she doesn't.
Yeah.
She's looked at the data.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, it's just like various trends in the media, I think, also go from west to east in general. So, you know, because of Hollywood and stuff.
Okay, then, all right.
Yes.
It's interesting to look at sick, it's going from a bad word to a good word.
That's that trend that I mentioned.
US Golf Association.
And 88, both three was one way.
Well, I mentioned that some of these words I think are not really slang. So you can see the last thing under sick, just this year, there was one person who said sick meant unhappy or disappointed. I think that's standard. You know, I'm sick about what happened to you. I mean, I think that's completely standard. I don't think that's slang at all, but that's an example of something that I believe if I'd been working with a group of students, they would have agreed probably that that was standard and we would have left it out. The problem is that sometimes there are words that we think of as completely standard, but students are using them sort of more. So an example, a sort of classic example of this is inebriated, which I think is a completely standard word meaning drunk. But there was one, I would have to look up what year it was, but there was one year when apparently all the sororities and fraternities at UCLA were using inebriated to mean drunk. And because they were using it in sort of, you know, very casual context and stuff, it did seem appropriate to regard it as slang because nobody would ever have used, you know, inebriated, then they would have used the word drunk. But these kids were using inebriated in a sort of unusual way. And that made it into one of our slang dictionaries. We have one word in the mini dictionary this year that I think may be an example of the same thing. So one student submitted the word dapper, which I think is a completely standard word, meaning something like well-dressed. And I think that's totally standard, but it's not a word I would expect college students to use. It's a sort of, like they borrow things that you don't think of as words that they're gonna use, and that makes them into slang. I mean, so often slang words come from something earlier. So particularly look at groovy. When groovy was first submitted, some students said it meant great, but then look at, I first recorded it in 1983, but then in 1987, it meant outdated. And if you think of the way groovy was used like in the 60s, there was a long time when it wasn't used, but then in the 80s, people sort of resurrected this word and thought, this is an interesting word, let's use that. So, it's very weird the way these things happen. I mean, I could have told you to spend a lot of time talking about, where slang words come from. There was a whole lot of different processes by which slang words are developed. We talked about acronyms. I mean, that's one way that we get slang words. And then another way is this thing about taking a negative word and making it into a positive word.
It's very confusing.
And there are lots of other ways that people make slang words. People are very creative with language and they come up with a lot of interesting things. Thank you very much.
Thank you.